Hey everybody, welcome back to the Midlife Coding Crisis. This is Rotary Dialer. In the last episode, we covered my old way of tracking musical ideas, the analog way, using cassette tapes and notebooks and stuff like that. Today, what I'm going to do is show you the software that I built way back in the day to pull these all together in the digital realm. First, let me talk about this title of the Midlife Coding Crisis. What's that about? So I personally have not had my midlife crisis yet. I often think about what's it going to be like, and I try to prepare like I'm cooking it up, right? It's going to be something good. But in terms of a coding crisis, what does that mean? So I've got this old technology that I've been relying upon for a long time. This is what I'm about to show you in a little while here. It works fine, really. There's no problem with it. Well, there are problems with it, which I'll enumerate, but for what I'm doing, it's really fine. But I'm kind of reaching a point where like, oh my God, I've been using this for 20 years and it could be so much better. I built it so long ago. So, it's obviously overstating the magnitude of the issue, but I just like framing it this way. I just kind of like thinking about, a midlife crisis is going to hit you and all of a sudden you're going to freak out about stuff that is actually fine, but you're going to want to suddenly change it. So yeah, maybe I'm stretching the metaphor. Maybe I'm taking it too far. I hope I'm not reducing anybody's experience out there. If you have had a midlife crisis, I'm sure it sucks. Okay, with all that said, let me get over to the software. Let me show you what is built in. I'm a little ashamed to show this all, but maybe it'll give you a flashback. Maybe it'll give you some nightmares. Let's show you what we got. Okay, so here we are. If you don't know what we're looking at, you've led a happier life than I probably, filled with sunshine. And if you do know what we're looking at, well, I'm sorry to subject you to probably some bad memories. But anyway, this is Lotus Notes. Yep. So maybe toward the end of this, I'll go into what Lotus Notes was. Basically, it was like a 90s kind of tech. It solved 90s kind of problems. It was, as I talked about in the last video, it was really internet everywhere. I mean, there was an internet, but you had to kind of deal with not being on it most of the time. I'll save the whole history lesson for later. If you're interested, I'll actually do a whole video on some of the history of Lotus Notes, what it was good for, what it was bad for. It's the vicissitudes that led to its demise and so on. But anyway, the point of this video is I just want to go over the musical idea tracking process. So I have a few databases here that I'm not going to go into all of this. This was sort of more the music metadata stuff. So for my band, we had set lists and shows and mailing lists and things of that nature. That was in here. I'm not going to look at that because that actually has some personal information for people. This music study database, if you're interested, maybe I'll go into this another time. This was my super analytical way of going about trying to figure out, why do I like a song? Like if there's some artists out there and they write great songs, but other songs in the same genre don't catch my attention, why does this one? This was a way of trying to kind of break it out analytically. But that's not what I'm going to go over this time. This time I'm going to go through how I captured and tracked musical ideas. So let's go into here. So last time I showed you, I had this notebook, and in the notebook, I would write things down. I also had these cassette tapes, these micro cassette tapes, and I would number those and I'd write the index of those down. So that's all this really was. So here, this is an early idea, right? It was on tape 4, side A. Don't worry about this project thing. This is just sort of the quote-unquote band or artist or whatever the project I thought it would align with. Oh, and we have a nice little acoustic progression with a really nice opening. Now, this is a theme. This is actually something I'd like your advice on. A theme I had all throughout. I never really got rid of it. It got better over time was, I'd write an idea down. I'm like, oh, this is nice. Oh, this is pretty. Oh, this is nice. And, 300 ideas later, it's like nice, 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 pretty, pretty, pretty. It completely useless explanation of the idea. So you'll see as some of these go on, you'll see these. I try to get a little more descriptive, but I've got a little typo in there. In any event, what are some of these things? So these are, I think these green check marks indicate that I actually recorded that song at one point. I think this indicates it's in an alternate tuning. So there's a whole bunch of different ways I could slice and dice these things. I have all these different views here. So let me focus on this one, this notebook. So again, I showed that notebook last time, and I would have that number in the notebook. So if I look at number, I don't know, what was, let's pick, 92, right? So open up 92. See it's in a drop D. I can open up the notebook to page 92, and I'll see a tab there. And if I play these, but if I want to listen to it, this is a digitized recording of that spot on the tape. All right. Anyway, you see, it looks old, it looks dated, right? But it's totally functional. If I wanted to find an idea, let's just look by style, right? Hey, let me collapse all these. What am I looking for? Let's say I'm in the mood to do something poppy. I can come here. Let's say I don't even know where to start. I just want to jump into this. Okay, I click this. I play it. There's too much chicka chicka in it. No, I don't feel like doing that. I can kind of browse through these. This is not that bad for kind of organizing things, right? So now if I talk about looking to modernize this in the future, what are some of the things I'm looking for? I want to be able to kind of slice and dice these things a bunch of different ways, okay? I want to be able to look at things by style. I want to be able to look at things by alternate tuning, right? I guess I messed around quite a bit with alternate tunings, but here are the counts over here, right? So this drop D, there's a lot of things in drop D. Dad, Gad, okay, those are pretty common alternate tunings. DA, DDD with a missing string. Oh, we're going to have a lot of those now. We got 2 ideas of that. And then things that I actually used and so on. So anyway, I think you can see where I'm going with this. I want to be able to browse through these things, kind of drop into some random ideas. Again, slice and dice this a bunch of different ways. Look at things from different perspectives. If I'm writing a video game, if I have to write video game music, oh, and then here's maybe a point of inspiration for me to start with. Or I want something uplifting. Here we go. All right, without giving it too much thought, right? I want to have this reservoir of ideas that's easy to go through, and easy to go through in a couple different ways. Okay, if I want to take another step, I'll show this briefly too. These were recordings I did on Mutli-track recorders, and that's actually you see the name of the database, Mutli-track recording. You're probably wondering, well, these are just idea notes. Why do you mention Mutli-track recorders? The thrust of all this is to be able to track digitally stuff that's happening like in an analog setting. So this was a 8-track recorder I had, and I needed to remember where all the faders were, and if I pull up a certain session on that, instead of having to experiment with where everything was, I wanted to be able to have a reference for all these things. Now, ultimately, this ended up being a fool's errand, right? This ended up being it was too cumbersome to remember all these things. So, but if this was on my Yamaha MT50, which was a 4-track, so it gave me, if I wanted to mix these things down, it gave me a little bit of a starting point on where to go. Okay, so here's a better example here. Got these 4 tracks, acoustic guitar, keyboard, and drums. That's the length of it. It's on this tape. This is the multi-track tape that I would use. I just changed the band name to Some Artist for the dang. It was recorded in 1997. So anyway, I actually have a box of these tapes. So if I ever want to remix it or remaster it, whatever, I'm not gonna. But if I ever wanted to get the stems off of those tapes, well, hey, I could pop tape number 18 in, and I could set the faders to these volumes, and I could set the EQ to these and pan it this way, and then I just like record it and walk away while it let's say I want to digitize it to this computer behind me. This gives me a reference to do that. Now this 8-track was another Fostex DMT 8VL. This is like, oof, this machine sucked. It was a pain in the butt to use. It was a hard drive recorder, but you couldn't change the hard drive. Anyway, I'm off on a tangent now. The main point I'll get back to is what I plan to modernize is this whole spiel here. all these idea notes. What have I got in here? I've got 484 idea stubs, if you will. Let me deselect all. And I want to get these into something else that's going to be more modern, more usable. Let me get out of this, go back to the other camera, and I'll talk about some of the good and bad things about this whole approach and where I want to take this in the future. Okay, so thanks for letting me show you that. If you're wondering why in the world did you build that in Lotus Notes, I can go into that. But before I do that, let me talk about what are some of the good and bad things about this whole approach. So first, the good thing, one of the things I liked about Notes, again, it was a 90s tech. It's way outdated, right? It's in no way something I want to be using today. But what are some of the good things? Well, everything's in one file. So even though you saw like basically the code of it, the design of it, the UI, and all the data is in a single file. So it's very easy to back up. It's very easy to move around, right? Even all those attachments get saved into the file and as, I guess blobs in some way. And I don't have to worry about carting a bunch of MP3s around and making sure the references are right. So that's one of the upsides of it. Another upside is it's offline, right? I don't have to have all this data up on a cloud provider somewhere, up on the internet somewhere. And so if my internet's out, I can still use it. If I don't feel like being on the internet, I can still use it. I can still listen to all my files. That's a very important constraint to me. It's one that I feel like is not going to resonate with a lot of people. Oh, but it's just so convenient to have it on the internet all the time. I just, and it's not even for security reasons that I don't want to do that, or privacy or anything like that. I don't really care if these files get out there, or, it's not like, oh, someone's going to steal my great ideas. That's not a concern at all. It's just a matter of this idea that you have to send things out to come back in when you've got a computer with a hard drive on it. It can hold files. Like, let me just serve it from there. And I would say the third good thing is that it's fast, right? It's being an old client. It boots pretty quickly. I mean, not as quickly as it should, frankly, but it's fast. And another benefit, it's super fast to build things. I could still probably open up, if I had some idea, I could open up and prototype an idea. I could prototype a little application if it's just capturing data and displaying it in Notes in no time. So if I can keep those three constraints, part of my modernization, I'd like to do that. I don't really have a great idea for how I want to do that. So what are some of the downsides? Well, there are many. One of them is that, the client is a dead client, basically, right? I have that client from my old work. When that computer dies, I won't have a way of reinstalling that that client. So all that data, once I don't have a Notes client anymore, will be very hard to access, if not impossible. Notes files are NSF files. That's a proprietary format as far as I know. It's not like there's some open source reader for those things. So I've dumped the data out of those databases into at least text and sometimes, in some cases, like SQL insert statements that should work in most ANSI standard SQL. So I can at least have some of that data ready if I ever need it. And that's part of the modernization plan. What are some other bad things about it? Well, it's a really ugly client, which I don't mind too much. I am much more a function over form kind of guy. As long as it works, I don't care if it looks ugly. I'd rather have something that's fast and ugly than something that's beautiful and slow. But it's not great that it looks so dated, right? The real reason I built this in Lotus Notes is at the time I was working, it was my job to build things in Lotus Notes. So anytime I could do a side project, it was just sort of like extra practice for work, right? Like that's kind of how I learn, is I learn by building something. I can learn from a course, I can learn from reading and theoretical a little bit, but it really sinks in when I build it myself, because then I find you're hitting these obstacles, I have to figure out how do you associate data across different data sets in Notes and things like that. So on to modernizing this whole mess, right? What am I going to do? First of all, I'm open to ideas. So please, if you have any ideas, share them. Let me know what you think and how you would approach this. Just because of the nature of my day job, I'm probably going to stick with technologies that I use every day just for the sake of familiarity. So that is mostly Node.js for backend stuff. I'll probably use Postgres as the database. I'll probably use React as the front end. Maybe Vue.js. It's been a little while since I've done Vue, but I did like working with Vue.js. But here's the thing. I don't want it to be a whole thing that requires a ton of setup and babying all the time. But neither do I want it to be on the cloud. So I think these are where these constraints are going to get a little tricky, right? Again, the thing I love about Notes, it's one file, right? But anyway, I'd like to set something up that's just not going to require a whole lot of babying. And this is where I get torn. There's some things I've heard about that I haven't used, things like Airtable. I mean, I know people do this stuff in like Google Sheets, and again, I don't want it to have to be online. I want to be able to have the option to serve it over the web if I need to someday. But ultimately, if I'm on my LAN here, I want to be able to list those ideas, read the text you saw in there, listen to the audio if there's audio, and so on. As I move forward and I start working on this, I'll start to share my progress and see if anyone has any ideas that I can implement. If this is something you think would benefit you, and again, you have some idea about it, like straight up, just share it with me. Let me know how you would approach this, because I feel like I'm a little mired in how to approach this. If you're interested, I will talk about, I do a future video where I talk a little bit about Lotus Notes. For me, it actually kind of has a little bit of an interesting history, keeping in mind that it was a really reviled product ultimately. Like it was kind of had a little bit of a sweet run from like the mid to the late 90s, and then I think it deserved some of the ire it got, but for the most part, it just got a really bad rap. And I think it was just a really poorly understood product. And yet I think it was kind of if you were a smart developer, if you weren't lazy about things, you learned some approaches that I would say have modern equivalents now. Something like microservices was something that you would almost out of necessity have to do in Notes if you were going to scale at all. We didn't call them microservices, but effectively you ended up with this sort of like fleet of tiny applications. So that's interesting to me. Also, it's the first NoSQL product I know of. In other words, what you saw there, it's not SQL that is being used to store and provide integrity to that data. They didn't call it NoSQL at the time. They called it document-based data store. But anyway, if you're interested in all that, let me save that for another video. I could go on for a little while about that. Okay, well, that wraps that up. And I really appreciate you tuning in. And again, share your thoughts. And thanks again for joining me in the Midlife Coding Crisis. I'll see you next time.